Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar today. The title of today's webinar is How to Enhance and Extend SAP Role-Based Controls. My name is Stephanie Anderson. I'm the Global Webinar Manager here at Pathlock. Our presenters today are Greg Wendt and Adi Goka, but before they introduce themselves, I'd just like to go over a few housekeeping items. If you have any audio issues during this webinar, please click on Preferences and then Audio. From there, you can check to see if you are using the appropriate audio device. You can also click on the play sound to check if you can hear the sound coming through your speakers. There will be a Q&A session following the presentation, so please type any questions into the Q&A chat box for our speakers to answer at the end of the event. To prevent background noise, everyone is on mute. And with that, I'll turn the time over to Adi and Greg.
Thank you, Stephanie. As she said, my name is Greg Wendt. I'm an executive director here at Pathlock. Just a little history of myself. I come from an oil and gas, retail, and higher ed background. I started with ERP systems back in the late 90s when everybody was trying to shift off of the mainframe for the year 2000s challenges. So I've been enterprise architect most of my career with dotted line to CISOs since joining the Pathlock and Pathlock team. I've got about 8 years doing this. I've done probably about 450 to 500 different security reviews for different organizations across the board. So that's just a little bit about myself. Adi, why don't you do a introduction as well?
Yeah. Good morning, guys. This is Adi Goka this side. So I have about 21 years of GRC experience. I've worked in multiple clients trying to streamline their GRC processes and trying to, so I get in when the auditors come in and ask them for evidence and stuff. So it's been exciting to work with different clients on different backgrounds and in different industries to get them up to spec on their governance requirements and their compliance requirements. So it's good to see you all. Good morning.
Perfect. Thanks, Adi. You're definitely going to hear more from Adi later when we jump into the demo session of today's webinar. So look forward to hearing from you again. So I thought I'd do a brief introduction of who Pathlock is and what we are really approaching the market with, what we're able to do, and give you just a brief intro. So Pathlock really is a market leader in application security and controls automation. You can see some of the customers that we work with there, and then also some of our partners. But we've got native and cloud-based solutions and support for over 140 plus applications. And really, those applications really allow us, support for those applications really allows us to drive into that value, because I went ahead and built out this slide, but here at Pathlock, we allow you to have 360-degree protection of applications, data, users, and processes. And you might wonder, what's the difference? You know, when we're talking about the applications, it's all applications. It's your on-prem, the cloud, legacy, your ERP systems, and we've got connections into all of those systems. When you talk about governing user access, for example, what we're able to do there is really show you what users can do. You know, whether it's emergency access, the user access review, all of those types of things. We've got very detailed automated workflows, processes around governing those user access points. The real difference, though, and the differentiator is the did do analysis, that next one, all the activity. That's really where we're able to monitor those business transactions and give you that understanding of what's happening inside of your business processes. Do you need to put any sort of mitigation into effect? And it also helps you end up with a risk score, because really security and applications, it's all about managing your risks and understanding what's happening inside of those environments. And then we've also got the ability to protect and quantify the risk there on the very end through IT controls, and that's vulnerability management, threat detection, app security testing, those types of things. So this is all of the time. This is, you know, quarterly, monthly, annually, or on an ad hoc basis that you can have this understanding. We do this really through a multiple approach. So we've got different processes inside of different areas. So when we talk about access governance, it's things like role redesign, SOD and risk analysis, user access certifications and reviews, privileged and temporary access management, those types of things. When we talk about process controls, and that's really where we're going to be focusing on a lot today, because those are really attribute-based access controls that are allowing you additional controls inside of the target application. So whether it's data masking, transaction monitoring, enforcements, dynamic authorizations, and you'll understand that as we get into it. And then on the cybersecurity management side, that's where we get into the vulnerability management, code scanning, those types of things. So when you look at the whole PathLock library of what we're able to do, this is a really great slide of being able to see all of the things that we're able to bring to bear to help you to protect your SAP system. So let's go ahead and get started. So when we talk about the topic today of how to enhance and extend the SAP role-based access controls, from an agenda perspective, what we're going to do is talk about why can't SAP roles do it all? Also, how to enhance and extend the roles cost efficiently. We're going to have a demo and then summary and Q&A. Obviously, if you have any questions during the session today, just use the GoToWebinar control panel. It's normally on the right-hand side of your screen, and you can submit any questions on the panel at that point, and we'll make sure that they get answered at the end as well. So let's go ahead and get started. So one of the questions that we have is, why is securing data so hard? You know, if you look at the annual number of data security breaches suffered by enterprises, it's increased by 27%. That's year over year from 20 to 21. There was a lot of attack vectors during the COVID time. It was one of those things that many organizations changed. There was a lot of chaos inside of organizations just because of all the changes that were occurring from a security, from personnel, people working from home, all, you know, that dynamic caused such an effect inside many organizations that the bad actors really followed COVID around the globe. If you look at the average cost of compliance, it runs approximately $10,000 per employee. E&Y, Ernst & Young, reported that GDPR compliance alone averages 156 million per company in the Fortune 500. That's expensive. That's a lot of money. And really, when you think about GDPR and some of those other compliance regulations and things like that, that's not a technical problem. It's a business problem, is what it really boils down to. Sure, the solutions might actually be technical, but it's really a fundamental business process of how and what you're doing in your applications, and you know what type of data you're collecting and storing and allowing access to, and things like that. But 78% of companies surveyed believe these figures will continue to rise. I would validate that as well. I mean, I don't see why those figures would continue to come down, because if you look at the number of compliance and regulation laws that are out there, it's just increasing. You know, many other different countries are doing GDPR-esque type of compliance and rules when it comes down to data privacy, and basically GDPR was a baseline for it. So maybe they're adding additional fields or transactions into it based upon what's important for their particular, you know, company or country, and those types of things. But you know what it really boils down to is the fact that really there is teeth to GDPR and fines based upon that as well. So it's one of the real big challenges that we've got out there. And when you think about SAP as a whole, just thinking about the data set, what's stored in it, you know, it's a very large system with multiple applications. Obviously, your entire business is going to be running on that most of the time, and you've got hundreds of transactions and really thousands of fields across your entire, you know, landscape of all of those transactions inside of SAP. And really what it was designed for was allowing you to process information in a very quick, rapid point in time, you know, whether that's payroll, financials, all of those other types of things. Some of the ERP apps are getting better at trying to control data and who's got access to it, but really that sensitive data is utilized throughout the application sets. You know, can be accessed, referenced, and it's very easy to be able to have access to that. And when you think about the number of touch points that you could be dealing with for just sensitive information, and then you add in financials and all of those other type of things, you're talking about in some scenarios, hundreds of transactions that you're going to have to be worried about. Who's touching, who's looking at, how am I protecting the data within those transactions and things like that. So it's a huge attack surface. because all of that data being in one particular area. So when we think about really the RBAC, the role-based access control, is really the foundation for data security and privacy. When you look at SAP, that's how your access is really granted. And it does a very good job of excelling on numerous areas, basically. So, when you're talking about being able to say, okay, a user needs to be able to access this transaction, work with this XYZ, those are really well. It allows them to have more of a technical role, is what I'll kind of call it, inside of the application set, where this user is able to do function X, Y, and Z. It's also good from an SOD reporting perspective as to who's got access to what particular transactions. Is there a toxic combination between those, for example? Have you given A and B, and that's going to cause a problem? And it's organic to the platform. It's designed into the platform. It's unique. It doesn't match what's been done in another application like Salesforce or Active Directory and those types of things. And it exists for access recertification, to where you can go in and say, all right, should this user have access to these things? What all has changed? Where the roles really struggle, though, is the enforcement of SOD. There's a difference between, active enforcement and reporting on it. A lot of organizations will work with the fact that it's very reactive in how they're going to approach an SOD style violation or test group. What are we looking for? What X type of transactions? So roles don't do a great job of enforcing SOD. If somebody has the ability to do A and B, that's what you're going to end up with. So also, it doesn't really protect you in the area of data change or theft prevention. I was just reading something the other day, and this happened to be in a higher ed environment, but somebody was actually stole like $40 million from a university, and it was actually through buying product and then actually reselling it, because they were just buying something within the range of the controls that they could do, and then they were selling it. So it was something that they made a lot of money on that over several years. So, and that kind of goes to show, on a process like that, they were within their bounds of what they were able to do. How do you know that it's valid or invalid? So and adjusting entitlements quickly based on regulations. It's something that, we were just talking about. The regulations aren't going to get any easier. We're going to get more of them. And how are they going to be different? And how can you adapt your system to be able to protect against those different regulations that we don't necessarily know exactly what the outputs of those regulations are going to be? But when you look at different global companies, it becomes a real challenge for how am I going to manage all of these different regulations and the data controls that need to be put into place. And the other side of it is, as well, policy and business strategy alignment. You might have a policy that states, I can't take data out of, it needs to stay on. And maybe it's a little bit more precise of a policy that says you can't take data out of the SAP system when you're off of the network. You can only do that maybe if you're on the network. Different policies like that. How do you actually align that with your security objectives and your business, and have that to where it's validated inside of the system as well? So going back to the agenda, I'm going to move on and talk about how we can enhance and extend roles cost effectively. So when we really shift, you've got to be able to build on the roles to achieve greater scale in controls at that particular layer. There's a lot going on this particular slide. So what we're really talking about here in this particular situation, I'm going to go to the pyramid on the far right side. When you move up that pyramid, it's going to give you more and more finite controls inside of your application set. So when you think about it, SAP starts with the roles that we have now. What we're going to be able to do through the PathLock solution is really bring in those additional layers, the user attributes, the data attributes, the transaction attributes, and then the rules. And what we do is we take in all of this additional information, what we're going to call a little bit of attribute-based access controls, or ABAC from that terminology, or even transactional-based controls. we're going to bring all of those in, and we're going to decide in real time whether or not somebody should or shouldn't have access to that data. That's really the shift. And what that does is it allows you to integrate and bring in all of those different challenges that we were talking about. So you have different things, different security policies that you can put into effect, maybe like data masking, for example. I want to do dynamic data masking based upon certain conditions as to how this user is accessing the system, or where they may be from, or geographically, things like that. I want to do transactional monitoring, blocking. I don't want them to be able to do certain transactions at certain times a day, or based upon other information as to how they're accessing that system. Exfiltrating of data, all different challenges like that. So that's the shift of what you get with the attribute-based access controls that you can layer in on top of those roles to make them really, really super effective. And obviously, the higher you get up that pyramid, the more controls you're going to have. And that's where you end up with business rules and policies that protect your entire organization. And you can implement those controls in a manner that's effective and really enforce your business policies at a security layer as well. 3 key requirements to efficiently extend role-based access controls. It's got to be simple and to configure and maintain. This can't be something that's going to extend the overhead and make it very difficult. Also, one-to-many enforcement, because if you think about the way the system's generated and how it's utilized, we were talking about it, the data is accessible all over through multiple different transactions. So how do I know that the data is going to be protected in all of these target transactions? So I need to have really one policy that can affect that. And then the dynamic protection aligned with SAP's authorization. So that dynamic layer brings in the ability to protect in a way that's very, very important. And I'll go into a little bit more detail on that in just a minute. So let's talk a little bit more and dig into the system-wide enforcement. So what we're talking about is really a one-to-many with a single rule set. So you're going to have a policy, and what it's going to do is it's going to allow you to protect data regardless of where that data might be accessed from. And it's enforceable in both the tables and in queries, for example, as well. So you can enforce across very complex landscapes, but the advantage to this is it easily adapts. So you can make changes, or if something happens, you can easily adapt to that. So that's one of the pure advantages of the system-wide enforcement, is the ability to protect the data, the transactions with that single rule set. When we talk and dig into a little bit more about the dynamic protection, because this is really important, because when you look at an attribute-based access control model, this is what gives you the power. It's going to simplify your policy creation, and it's also going to protect you against a lot of real world scenarios, because it's considering that context or how that user is accessing the system. And so when we look at the triangle, over to the right hand side, what we're going to do is we're going to bring in a lot of additional context. It could be the user attributes, things on their role, things that we know about them. It could be the data that they're actually working with. What do we know about that data, and should that user be able to access that data? Should they work with it? Should they touch it? Those types of things. And then also the access content. How is this user accessing my system? Are they on my network? Are they on my VPN? Are they coming in remote on the internet? Those types of things, additional context. And what we do is we take all of those contextual things together, and then we apply that to the business rules, because that's going to change maybe what that user should or should not be able to do within the target transaction, if that makes sense. So all of that additional context allows us to apply additional security to that transaction, thus protecting in a way that you can't do with just a role-based access control model. So that's really where a lot of the power comes in. And the nice part is we are not changing their roles or their permissions to do any of this. It's just layering in on top of the system from that perspective to allow you to apply these additional contextual pieces of information to decide whether or not that user should or shouldn't work with the transaction. It also is very native integration. So it's implemented without additional customizations to SAP. So you can see from the little architecture there inside of the SAP app server, there's a native Pathlock plugin, and there's a rules engine that sits between there. So that's where we're actually sitting in. So for example, it's going to filter out the data at the UI level. So it doesn't change the underlying data. So when you talk about maintenance and requirements for updates, you don't have to worry about those either. All of this is enforced in line. So there's no performance challenges or hiccups with this. And that's actually one of the things with being an SAP certified solution that we have to go through, or performance checks and balances to make sure that we're not adding additional overhead and those types of things. So this is a native integration, and you'll see that with the demo that Adi goes through today, that this is definitely built within the platform. And that's one of the advantageous parts about it that allows us to do what we're able to do with those dynamic protections and the attribute-based access controls. So I'm going to talk quickly about a couple of different contextual security use cases. I've got one for HR and then another one for like financial. So when we talk about that, I've given you, what we're able to do and what we're able to look at, but how does this actually apply to the usage, and how is it going to affect the end user? Because it's, once again, we're not making changes to their roles inside of the system. So, the example would be if somebody's working with a daily process, let's say T code PA20, for example. So they're going to be displaying the HR master data. So there's a lot of information on that transaction, and we might want to think about how that user is going to work with that transaction based upon multiple different pieces of information. So for example, we might protect that dynamically based upon location and time, those types of things. So if they are in office, in a completely trusted environment, for example, what we're going to do is that user is going to be allowed to see and work with everything that they would normally do. Why? Because we know where they're at. It's a protected environment, often not corporate assets and all of those types of things. So, probably the most secure way that they're going to access your SAP system. When we think about remote users may access multiple different ways. Maybe it's on a VPN, maybe it's on internet, depending upon what your controls and how you want to do it, the engine can then decide, all right, they're coming in remote. So rather than displaying certain information, we're going to go ahead and mask and protect out that information. So now they're not going to be able to see it. So you can pick and choose maybe it's private information inside of this one. So a national ID, for example. So we're going to protect that national ID. It's going to be masked out, and they're not going to be able to see that because of coming in remote. We don't want data exposed outside of our organization, for example. And then another example too could be, dynamic access. Keep in mind, they've really been given access to this transaction, and we're not changing that. But as the user comes in after hours, maybe it's 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, why are they attempting to access that transaction at that particular point in time? So you can have your business policy that says, we're not going to allow access. Okay, well, we're going to enact and protect on that. So after hours usage is going to be blocked. And so that's where that attribute-based access control layer comes in and blocks transactions or blocks access to that particular transaction because it's after hour usage. Even though normally the system would allow that user to have access to that particular transaction at that time. When we think about it from a supply chain use case, very similar. So this might be protecting pricing and sales order data. Could be dynamically based on location and time. Once again, really looking at BA03 from a T code perspective. Once again, if that user is in the office, they're going to be able to do whatever they need to be able to do. It's trusted, protected area. They can see what they want to do. If they're a remote, maybe they're at a client site, maybe they're at a remote location of your office. I've seen all sorts of different scenarios like that. So if they're at a manufacturing site or some scenario like that, there's certain information that they don't want, your organization doesn't want shared or viewable at that particular point. So rather than actually having like a sales order and understanding what the line item cost is and all those types of things, you can protect that. So you can actually hide those costs. So depending upon where they're at, that information isn't readable or isn't accessible. The transaction still works. It's just you're not going to see that information in there. And then once again, same type of scenario. If there's some anomaly, is somebody trying to access this information based upon policies that you don't want, like after hours. Once again, we're not going to allow that to happen. So we're going to stop that user from doing that particular process, even though normally they would have been granted the ability to do that. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Adi here real quick. So I'm going to stop sharing and give control to Adi, and he's going to go in and demo a lot of these scenarios in the system for us.
Yes, thanks, Greg. Appreciate it. So hi guys, this is Adi back, and let me quickly share my screen so you guys can. What I'll do is take you through the innards of the system and how we actually affect all that Greg was talking about, and show you guys. Okay, let me clicking on show screen. Okay, do we have to change presenter? I think. Okay, and now yes. So I'm showing my screen. Can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Super. So, so guys, this is what I'm going to show you is a few examples of how we can actually affect all the controls that Greg was talking about. And so first off, I wanted to just illustrate the environment that we're talking about, right? And I'll be showing you some of the SAP native SAP screens, which is basically the SAP GUI. But this is extendable to your S4 environment with Fiori tiles. It is extendable to any other CM tools, etc., that you can imagine. Pathlock was, as Greenlight was previously a connector company, so we pride ourselves in like 140 plus connectors that go and connect to different applications. But today, primarily, we'll be talking about the SAP GUI, and then real quickly, I wanted to highlight that both users, there are different users logged on to the same system, SAP GCM. And one of the users here is Dan, and he'll be our policy administrator. He'll be the one who'll be making changes to the system. And we see an SAP dev, a generic SAP development user. He has privileges of a business user as well. So we'll see how the policies that Dan will enact will affect SAP Dev. And real quickly, I wanted to actually show you guys the access that is laid out for these two users. So, and if there are SAP security admins in the audience, you'll understand SU01 is the transaction code that we use to kind of go and look at different access portions of these particular users. So, so real quickly, this is Dan, and so we have configured Dan to have no roles and profiles of SAP All and SAP New. The reason why we do that is this is not required by the solution, but at the same time, what we wanted to show that there's no authorizations are coming from or restrictions are coming from the SAP native system at all. So this is just basically SAP All and SAP New. So nothing in the SAP access is going to affect what we're going to see from here on. So, so I wanted to actually highlight what Greg was talking about in terms of how we can lay down this access in terms of the attributes. So when we talk about attributes, the attributes of a user can be utilized. So let's say, for example, the user belongs to a certain group, right? So we can utilize that particular group memberships. We can also utilize the attributes of the data itself, the data that this person is trying to access. So it could be a classified folder, it could be IP, the intellectual property that you guys want to safeguard from inadvertent events and bad actors. It could also be something that is very that is laid out by regulatory compliance, saying this is a GDPR sensitive data element, or it's HIPAA sensitive, or any of your regulatory compliance data elements. We can actually use that to kind of mask it or actually stop the access to it. So if you guys look at the screen, let me show you what we call the policy in the attribute-based access controls. And attribute-based access controls are laid out by NIST. So this is not a new construct that we're using. It's about a decade old, and we have quite some implementations with this, where several clients that are already using this particular controls to kind of affect their compliance policies. So this is what we call the policy master. And if you look at it, there's several transaction codes here. And if I scroll down right to the bottom, you'll also see that there are Z transaction codes that we can also secure based on this. So the first way that we secure it is basically transaction control. What I can do is I can prevent people from getting into any of these transaction codes itself. And furthermore, I can also protect what data is available through those particular transaction codes. I will pick a very simple example here, which is RZ11. Now, basis administrators in the audience will also notice that RZ11 is a profile parameters transaction code, and nobody should have access to the profile parameters except the basis team. In most cases, with very many clients, I've seen that RZ11 is only restricted to a couple of people in the basis team. So it's that sensitive, and we would like to safeguard that. So when SAP Dev, right, he tries to access the RZ11 transaction code, I can actually go in and stop him, even though he has SAP All and SAP New. I can actually have him be stopped at the RZ11 transaction code because I have deemed it sensitive, and I do not want anybody to have access to this. So the way we tie this particular policy to the users is via user groups that we set up, and those particular user groups are basically what we use to kind of allow or disallow several aspects of this policy. So these are our user groups. They're separate from your SU01, SUGR user groups within your SAP system. But what we do is each of these user groups designates a policy, and then that policy, the membership of these user groups can be utilized to kind of affect how a user sees that policy or interacts with the system using that policy. So real quickly, let me go back to, and everybody understands that the attributes of the user, the attributes of the data, and the context in which this particular access is happening can be utilized to make these access control decisions dynamically and on the fly. So let me show you what most of these things. I wanted to outlay first the context and what the context of this access really means. So when we have defined several context keys here, and one of them is the IP group, and saying that this is the blacklisted IP group from where we do not want to allow anybody to get access to our system, right, and the transactions within. So the IP group 1 that's set up here as the blacklisted IP is 0.0.0.0 to 10.0.30.139. So let's say the user on the right, SAP Dev, is trying to access any particular sensitive data element within the system, right? So we just looked at how we can get control over the transaction codes. Now let me show you, let's say this person wants to go in and look at the vendor bank details. And if he goes into that particular vendor listing and then he looks at the payment transactions of that vendor, I'm running generally the XK03 transaction, it could be FK03 as well. So when we go in there, the bank account and the gray and the account holder, the gray header, all of this information is currently available to this person. Now I want to highlight where this person is logging in from, and if I go real quickly and I wanted to show you that, let me run, and I'm going to run a simple function module to show you guys where this user is coming from, and SAP Dev. So I'm going to put in SAP Dev here, and then when I run this, you'll see that this person is coming in from the IP address 10.0.30.141, which is outside of our blacklisted IP range. So if and this is the policy that you guys would be looking at. So I wanted to change this particular policy, and I wanted you guys to pay attention to how easy it is for a data protection officer, let's say in Europe, who needs to report any outages or any breaches within 72 hours. So if right now I'm changing this to include 145, let's say, so that includes the user's this thing here. So he's 141. So I just extended the blacklisted IP range, and I'm saving the policy here. And it's that simple. When the policy is saved, And if I, let me get out of this screen, and then if I go back to this particular vendor display, transaction code, and then I go back into it, I can mask the bank account and the account holder information and the bank key. Now, I can also apply templates, masking templates to it, saying that the bank account last 4 digits should be available, or the account holder first name, last name, whatever should be available for people to see. It could also be last 4 digits of your social security number, social insurance number if you're in Canada. And so all of that information I can control on the fly just by changing one line in the policy. And this is, we are not adding any more customizations to your roles, right? This layer of authorizations is sitting on top of your roles. So, and providing on the fly, scalable and dynamic. If I wanted another IP group 2 to be enabled for whitelisted or some other use case, I can enable this very quickly and in record time. I don't have to, for example, traditionally you would have to go to your security team, have them draw up a spec for you in terms of what controls are there, right? And find the authorization objects for it, and then establish that control, test that control, which takes record time, like at least 4 to 8 weeks. By all of that time, what Pathlock can do for you is basically have this in like an 8-week period, utilizing multiple controls using the attribute-based access controls. So that being said, I wanted to cover a few more use cases here that you would find interesting. So you'll find that you'll ask me, okay, now can we have done that with SAP transactions. We've also done, I've also told you that custom transactions are also part of the mix. There's also different layers of Fiori tiles, etc., that we can utilize in the previous policy master. Now, what we can do is, I'm going to show you what happens with tables, right? So people are always stealing data from tables. Let's say SAP dev just got fired and he's a disgruntled employee now, and then he wants to go into the table and steal some data. So let's say he's going into S11 and he's trying to get the purchase order header, EKKO, out, right? So when he's displaying it, and then he goes to display the actual table here, and then when you execute it, this is all my data, right? This is all sensitive data that I have deemed sensitive. I don't want anybody to see. Now, even on the screen, we can provide masking templates to kind of mask any portion of this data, or if, for example, I do not want any of the vendor information to be seen, right? I don't want any of the number of the EKKO entries to be seen. So I can actually apply a masking template to affect this. Now, what happens when he actually goes in and tries to download the data? I can stop him cold in this tracks, saying I can restrict that SE16 transaction code from downloading anything in the EKKO table because I have deemed it sensitive. And several such constructs are available where we can really utilize and drive this attribute-based access controls really hard to kind of provide you with regulatory compliance and also safeguard your IP. So let's say, for example, this thing is I can also go to the extent of, let's get out of the SE11. And if you look at the generic data browser transaction codes like SE16, which is prevalent across the organization. Many people would want to look up tables in this thing, but not in the context of disgruntled employees. So I'm going to pick another table here. This is the material type table, and if I look at this, and then you'll see that there's 2 types of entries here on the material type. There's the FERT, which is basically finished goods, and I have deemed that my finished goods, and we have some really sensitive clients who do not want the finished product to be seen. This could be bombs. This could be other sensitive things. It could be parts of an aeroplane, you know. So the finished product is what I don't want people to have access to. Now, VERP is just packaging the second entry on this particular screen, and VERP is not sensitive in my book, in my policy. So let's say this person wants to now download this information. So when he wants to, so I'm just going to put it on the as a text file on the desktop, which will make it easier for us. And then I'm going to give it webinar 00115. So I'm just going to put a generic name here, and then I'm going to say generate. So when I download this particular table, and then if I go up here, that's our file right there. I'm going to use the notepad to kind of open it up. If you look at it, there's only packaging materials have been downloaded and not the finished product. And that's the level of control that we can achieve with respect to attribute-based access controls using the Pathlog solution. So now I've also wanted to show you two other use cases. If you guys will allow me, and let me get back. And then, so what else can we do with the attribute-based access controls, right? Since we are capturing the essence of the data, right? I can affect several business process controls within the same attribute-based access control. So if you look here on the context, we have set up the context for net price, and the price restriction for POs is $10,000. So I do not want anybody to go into the system and release a PO that is over $10,000, for example. So when this user SAP dev goes on to say a transaction code like 28, and he's trying to look at several of the list of vendor release, and he can see stuff that is under $10,000 and over $10,000. So if I try to pick anything over $10,000 and I hit release, I can stop this user because the maximum allowed value I have specified in my context of this access is $10,000. So I can affect a lot of the business process controls that you would need a dedicated system like SAP GRC, PC. I can affect them with one single line of the policy. And that's where the advantages become more apparent, because you could have, every company has about 50 to 45 to 75 business process controls that they desire, but they usually are not in a position to implement a tool like GRC, PC, or any other process control tools, or let alone trying to achieve it through customizations, like, for example, putting up a release strategy, putting up different levels of workflows, etc. Now, this is a quick and easy method to kind of affect that business process control without really affecting a whole bunch of customizations. And somebody like your SAP security administrator can actually work with this particular entry in this particular context table. So the last use case that I wanted to show you guys is how we can help prevent some of the SODs. So SAP GRC, ERP Maestro, as well as CSI tool, and there's several tools in the market for SOD analysis. Now, SOD analysis tells you where contiguous business processes might present a risk to your organization. So when you're using these contiguous access, where the access may become may result in a segregation of duties issue, you are only intimated of the potential of this particular SOD, right? So what SAP GRC is going to tell you is that the potential for a person in his access to do, let's say, a PO creation as well as doing goods receipt, right, is high, but it doesn't tell you anything about how we can really prevent it. Now, let me show you a way that we can use that. So I'm going to use the same user, SAP Dev, and let's say he has created some POs in the system. What happens when he actually goes and creates a goods receipt for the same POs that he's created? So I'm going to go into the C16 data browser again, and I'm going into the purchase order header again, EKKO, and I'm going to run a query I'm going to query this table for what stuff that SAP Dev has created in terms of POs. So when I look into that, he has created all of these purchase orders in the system. And if he's a bad actor and if he wants to commit fraud, he will pick any of these particular purchase orders. Let's say I'm going to pick 12 just for an example. And if I take this particular table and then I run a Migo transaction code, which is basically our goods receipt, and if I plug in this particular purchase order that SAP Dev himself has created, right? So this is a user trying to commit fraud actively at this point in time. So when he tries to do that, I can prevent him because this is an SOD, because I am looking at the attributes of the data itself, and I'm looking at the attributes of the data as deep as the document number. And that's what we can affect in terms of attribute-based access controls. And this would be almost impossible trying to do this via roles, or it would lead to a very high level of customization that's difficult to maintain via upgrades. Tomorrow, if you're going to go into today, if you run ECC, and tomorrow if you're upgrading to S4, all of these controls have to scale with you. And that's one of the biggest challenges that that exists due to normal constructs of roles and role-based access controls. But attribute-based access controls can be set up very quickly, and they're scalable and they're dynamic. So each of these things, let's say I don't have to change anything. We've had some ITAR customers where the nationality of the user is very important, whether he's trying to access anything in the USML, the munitions list. And let's say his citizenship today is a non-US person, but tomorrow he becomes a US person. So we can affect that particular change without even no changes to the policy, because now the value that is being read in to actually interpret and affect that policy is now changed to US person, and everything that is that needs to be visible to a US person happens automatically. So that's how quickly we can scale into this. And when we are using these particular constructs, there's several. When we have all of this data, we can also go in and perform a lot of these things with a lot of decisions based on this thing, and we can report on your compliance, on your business process, etc. Utilizing any number of SIEM tools that could be integrated. Here we're using Splunk, but it doesn't have to be. So the count of critical transactions, for example, all the way to if you go by privileged access, and we can bring this to bear on most of the things that your auditors will ding you for. So, for example, I wanted to, let's wait for some of the data to be available. So on the segregation of duties, we can apply it to the document number, like I highlighted. So if a user, for example, this person is in this group, and then he just ran ME21N, and he also tried to do a goods movement. So we have the potential to highlight these particular document numbers and have somebody review them. And it becomes that simple for us to route this to, let's say, a manager, and ask him to approve this particular entry. So that's pretty much all I had for you guys today. I hope you found the information succinct and are looking to know more. So I will give the control back to Stephanie at this point.
Thank you.
I'll go ahead and take it real quick, just to wrap up a couple of slides here. So a couple of the different use cases, with what Adi went through and things like that, where this could really be utilized, is masking of PII of customers in SAP CRM, for example, based on their residency. Why is that important? It's really important for GDPR compliance and other issues that are coming up from compliance perspective across the globe with the different regulations that are coming into place. You also might want to mask and lock bank account fields after hours. Really deals with theft and fraud. Another area where we have seen usage of it is, masking of data fields and transactions that are unnecessary for the role. It's scenarios where you can see financial spend, or pricing information, but you want to pick and choose. It really comes down to data minimalization and least privileged access, which is, definitely a different type of security model that some organizations want to implement. When you're implementing that least privileged access, you really control what users have access to see. So, and then also mask unpublished financial information in high risk scenarios. We've seen, especially in the area of organizations that have purchased or mergers, acquisitions, those types of things, to where data has been leaked to social media, because they'll start looking at these different systems when they're merging them all together, find out what people make, the executives, the payment plans or compensation plans are very different between these organizations. So, any way that you can minimize that risk of having data like that exposed to organizational people. So it really allows you to extend and enhance the role-based control with the PathLock system. As you can see, it's embedded into your SAP system, so it allows you to quickly make policy changes, and it really allows you to enforce your business policies within the SAP system without having to customize SAP. So with that, just from a quick wrap up, you can see by enhancing and extending the RBAC, you can better meet compliance requirements. You can protect that data exactly where and when you need to. You can reduce the cost of audits and compliance. You can also integrate data protection into your business process. You can satisfy corporate data security policy requirements. You can actually implement those across the system, and you can minimize your data exposure and residual risk of how people are accessing your system. And it allows you to really shift to a proactive data security strategy rather than being reactive across the board. So with that, I'll hand it back to Stephanie at this particular point.
Okay, thank you, Adi, and thank you, Greg, for your presentations. We just want to open it up for questions. So if you have any questions, please enter them into the question box. The first question we have is, can this extend to other non-SAP applications?
I'll take that one, Adi. So when we're talking about how we can actually utilize this and where we can, it depends upon the application sets and which features and functions that you're actually looking for. For example, the attribute-based access controls we can do within PeopleSoft and EBS, as well as the SAP system. When you're talking about orchestration, identity and access management, any sort of governance and risk and compliance, that's cross-application support. So you're going to get a lot more into multiple application sets at that particular point in time.
Okay, great. The next question is, what is the typical implementation time, and can this be easily maintained by internal staff after implementation?
I'll take that, Stephanie. So the implementation time, usually including the discovery process, is usually 8 weeks. And we've seen a couple of plus or minus 2 weeks, depending on how complex the requirement is and how broad are these controls to be exercised. So and as you've seen in the demo, the users are really linked to the groups, and it's just group membership. If you guys, some of our clients want a very major implementation where they want 15,000 users, for example, not to have access to a particular data element. In that case, we've used roles. So we use a dummy role to kind of like make the, as part of the attribute to kind of affect the controls. So it is fairly simple and distinct. So.
Okay, great. That's all the time we have for questions today, as we're at the top of the hour. So I'm just going to go over a few announcements. We have a PathLock Virtual Innovation Series Summit coming up. It's a virtual conference, and that will be October 26th, 27th, 28th, and then November 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. You can expect to hear all kinds of topics. We're going to be talking about all of our different products, and we're going to be partnering with a bunch of different companies to do a bunch of webinar series. So if you would like to attend that, you can find the information on our website at pathlock.com or on LinkedIn, on our social media pages on PathLock, you'll be able to see announcements there as well. Okay, so we have webinars coming up on SAP topics. So our next one is how Azure AD customers can enable continuous compliance with PathLock. And that's on Thursday, October 12th at 1 p.m. Central Daylight Time. And then we have 5 ways to ensure real-time threat detection. And that will be on Thursday, October 20th at 10 a.m. Central Daylight Time. So if you would like to register for those, again, we will be sending out emails about that to register, and it will be on our social media pages. And with that, I just wanted to say thank you so much for attending this webinar, and we hope to see you at future events.